A big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Hello everyone, hope you're doing well and thanks for joining us today. Now, a few weeks back, I put out a video that aimed to debunk the video clips which people claim prove the ISS is all fake. Now, there were several clips I'd looked at, some of which were part of montage videos, and unsurprisingly, my video received quite a bit of pushback. Some people accused me of cherry-picking the footage to avoid having to address the clips that they felt proved it was all fake, except as I pointed out in my original video, and I have to actually thank one of my Patreon backers for this because they messaged me recently as they're skeptical about NASA and wondered if I'd be prepared to make a video tackling some of the examples that they'd found online, so they sent me 6 clips, and here we are. They sent me the videos and included the specific parts that they wanted me to address. I just looked at the bits that they'd asked me to. So the only cherry picking that took place was from them selecting which parts particularly made them question things. But it seems most of the pushback I received from that video was actually targeted at this particular clip. So today I'm going to delve into people's responses and show hopefully once and for all why it can't possibly be fake and that it was actually done in space. And speaking of space, let me first give a quick shout out to Squarespace who are sponsoring this video. If you're looking for a website or a domain, Squarespace is where I'd recommend. The website builder is so easy to use. Just choose one of the templates from the hundreds that are available, and then with the user-friendly interface, it's so simple to customize the website to look how you want. They then offer a whole host of other features you can incorporate, such as online stores, an email marketing campaign, a calendar for scheduling appointments, and all with a complete analytics section to be able to monitor how your website is performing. To start with a free trial today, head on over using the link in the description, squarespace.com/Dave McKeegan, and to get 10% off your first purchase, then use the code Dave McKeegan at checkout. So this clip was taken from a broadcast during mission STS-135, which incidentally was the last ever flight of the space shuttle. The crew consisted of Commander Christopher Ferguson, seen here front left, shuttle pilot Doug Hurley next to him, and behind them are mission specialists Sandra Magnus and Rex Walheim. And the conspiracy theorists bring up 2 points of contention with this clip. Sandra Magnus's hair sticking up, which we'll address later on, but the main one is the moment where Chris Ferguson does a backwards roll. The claim is that the astronauts are actually in a studio wearing a wire harness to create the appearance that they're floating, and that when Chris does the backwards roll, firstly, Rex reaches up out of frame to try and grab a wire or something, although there's no evidence to back this up because we can't actually see what he's aiming for because it's out of frame. In fact, STS-135 did a tour video of the space station during their mission, and they showed the compartment where this video was shot. And you can see they've got wires and computers stuck all over the place. So it's quite possible that Chris's foot was potentially going to hit something and Rex was just reacting to it. The main contention though comes as Chris begins drifting off to the left of the frame and Doug reaches out to pull him back into frame. And the conspiracy theorists say at that moment Doug is actually grabbing a wire, which is why his hand gets pulled the way it does. I mean, for starters, if Chris is wearing a wire harness here, as he does the roll, you would expect to see his clothes moving around as he does so, but we don't see any of that. Now, when we view a higher quality version of the footage, you can see that Doug actually grabs Chris's pocket with his little finger, so he is actually directly holding Chris, but people argue that the rest of his hand is still acting as though it's grabbing a wire. Now, we can see that Doug isn't looking over to Chris when he reaches out. He's keeping his eyes looking fairly forward, probably looking at a monitor just off to the side that they're using as a reference for their framing. So he's aiming instinctively to try and grab Chris, meaning he'll just try and grab at Chris's clothing, and this will be tensing all of his fingers. But only his little finger actually catches anything. That finger will get pulled out, and his whole arm will snag, while the rest of his fingers remain fairly gripped, creating the appearance that he's grabbing at a wire. People have repeatedly claimed you can see the wire, except you can't. you can see a hand that's behaving similar to it grabbing a wire, but you can't physically see a wire there. But that explanation didn't fly with some people who argued, no, Doug Hurley is clearly grabbing a wire. However, a big problem with the idea of there being a wire there is that he's doing a roll whilst holding a wired microphone, meaning that if there was a cable attached to his hip, then as his hip comes up and over, the harness wire would tangle with the microphone cable. And yet, he finishes the roll and the microphone cable is still freely moving around. And the microphone cable is floating, which if it were on Earth, it would be pulling down towards the ground. Well, I mean, maybe the microphone didn't actually have a cable. Maybe it was added in later as CGI. Seems overly complicated though. Why not just say it was a radio mic so it didn't need a cable? I'd also highlighted that all 4 astronauts are floating, so all 4 would need harnesses and cables, which would then very likely cause all of the cables to become tangled with each other. They wouldn't have 2 cables each either. Harnesses to get such movement to resemble weightlessness wouldn't be just a pair of cables at the hip, because the moment you try and do a roll, you're still going to rotate fast because of gravity. To have a slow, controlled roll like this requires wires in the upper bar of the body and the legs as well. That's 4 lots of those all together would cause absolute carnage. Someone suggested that the astronauts were maybe shot in 2 pairs separately. So they'd say film Chris and Doug together in front of a green screen, and then film Sandra and Rex afterwards and choreograph their movements to coincide with Chris and Doug's footage. But that would then mean that this wasn't done live, and instead would have had to have gone through extensive amounts of editing to put it all together. There's also no evidence in this footage of separate clips being overlaid. You can see in the shadows the moving on the back wall as Chris does his roll. Now, it seems incredible that editors went into that much detail to render correct lighting and reflections in the laptop, but nobody thought to edit out Doug grabbing a wire or even just make Chris reshoot the roll so Doug didn't need to grab a harness cable. Another suggestion I saw a few people put forward to explain away the problem of the astronauts' cables all tangling was that maybe it was shot in a zero-G plane. Except a zero-G plane wouldn't need a harness, so therefore that voids the idea that Doug is grabbing a harness in the first place. The other problem with that idea is that zero-G flights only create weightlessness for about 20 seconds. Apollo 13 was shot using zero-G flights for their space scenes, but that had to use a lot of regular camera cuts to mask the different takes. This, however, is one shot, one camera angle with no sudden changes of positions of anything that would suggest a cut in the footage, much less there being a cut every 20 seconds. Now, lots of people drew attention to Sandra's hair because it's sticking straight up, and people claim that she's got a ton of hairspray to cause it to stick up and give the impression that she's in space. Now, the fact is, on Earth, gravity would pull the hair down. In weightlessness, the hair will float and sit wherever you put it.
And brush. See how much better the brush makes my hair look? I'm just joking. It still stands up straight. It doesn't matter where you are. It's always going to stand up straight while you're up in space.
So I was doing some digging and I've actually managed to find the original full broadcast that this video came from. It took place on day 7 of the mission, and this, for me, in its entirety, absolutely destroys any notion of it being faked. We can see at the start of the broadcast, Sandra actually has her hair tied back. Throughout the stream, we can see there are many interactions between all 4 astronauts as well, confirming that they were all together at the same time. Even at one point, Sandra puts the microphone cable straight across the top of Doug's head, so he can't be wearing a harness there. but he's still able to float around. Then about 12 minutes into the broadcast, Sandra removes her hair bobble and moves her hair around, both by shaking her head and playing with it with her hands. There is no way her hair would be able to move freely like this if it was drowned in enough hairspray to stick it up rigid on Earth. The one other thing about the roll clip that I later noticed was that Sandra is wearing a chain around her neck, and you can see it is floating freely too. Now, having astronauts in a harness is one thing, but putting a chain in a harness seems a bit OTT. Some people, unsurprisingly, try to argue that it was all shot in front of a green screen and so the chain was CGI. Except if you speak to anyone who has used a green screen, they will tell you a key part of making them work is having them lit evenly.
Now you want to make sure that this light isn't so bright that you're casting a shadow onto your green screen or blue screen or whatever. However, that would introduce the second type of light you'll need, and that is the lights or light that you will use to actually light up your background. You need to be able to do the best you can to achieve one flat color behind you. A mistake I made was putting a light behind me and shooting it up just at one spot. It created a vignette, which is introducing too many shades of color.
There needs to be a consistent flat lighting to them to be able to accurately mask them out in editing later. If the lighting is uneven or changing, they are an absolute nightmare. And for starters, as I alluded to earlier, we can see their shadows are casting on the back wall. Usually you would want people standing far enough away from the green screen to avoid their shadows being cast. Moreover, in the full original broadcast footage, a few minutes after the whole wire grab saga, Sandra heads over to the back wall and actually opens the cover of one of the port windows to show space outside. And in doing so, we see a very dramatic change to the lighting within the cabin. If this was a green screen in a studio, that would play absolute havoc with the colours and the editing. In fact, if you scan through the complete broadcast at speed, you can see there is a steady change to the overall lighting on the walls, and the left port window has a lot of light moving around it with a light source shining through the gaps around the edge. I wonder what that could be. Although for anyone curious, this is the view from outside of that window, and this is taken from the STS-135 tour video.
How's that for a winner of a view?
All told, the constantly fluctuating lighting is the last thing that you would see with a green screen in such a confined space, and would cause serious problems with trying to mask out all of those wires and any shadows or reflections that they might have cast. If this was a studio shoot, so much would be done differently. The lighting would be consistent, the people would have either been spaced apart or not be allowed to do any acrobatics, and things wouldn't have been added in unnecessarily, such as microphone cables or necklaces. And funnily, the hair that many people are convinced is proof it's all fake, when put into the context of the complete video, rather than just a cherry-picked snippet, actually proves this footage must have been shot in space, because hair can't behave like that on Earth, and the whole clip is going on far too long for it to have been done in a zero-G plane. And I think that's a good place to draw this video to a close. Once again, thank you to Squarespace for their continued support, and you'll find their offer down below. As always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down there as well. While you're down there, if you enjoyed this video and you haven't already done so, then please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and then hopefully we'll see you in the next video.